Ready? Should we start?
Yes.
Okay. So in these testing times, one thing is very pertinent, that the information and knowledge that you source must be from a credible and correct sources. ETAuto has been trying to bring all the reliable and the best speakers and experts to share information on how the industry is dealing with the COVID crisis, and what are the ways they can find a way to maneuver through these tough times. We have known that Japan is known for coming out from crisis, be it Fukushima or any other, in quickest way. We have seen even during the COVID crisis, the life there in Japan has been almost normal. There has not been any massive lockdown like India, Italy, or many other countries. Still, there has not been much of spread. At the same time, the production continue to be there. Automotive industry is running there. To understand that, I have called my friend from Tokyo, Hans Greimel, to discuss what are the steps the government in Japan taking, how the situation is in Korea, and what's shaping in Detroit. Hans Greimel is the Asia editor of world's one of the most reputed magazine called Automotive News. Hans, welcome to ET Auto. First, give us a sense how things are transpiring in Japan. You had first case, and since then we have not seen any complete lockdown in Japan. The production and the work continue to be there. There's no compulsory work from home yet. So how is it happening there?
Sure. Thank you, Nabil. It's a great honor to be here with ETAuto today. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's you do great work, and I really admire you from afar. I watch your website closely from Tokyo. So thank you for
Thank
having me. Um, Maybe I should just step back and give you a quick overview of how the COVID-19 pandemic has hit Japan. The first case appeared here in January 16th, actually, in Japan. And it's been kind of slowly snowballing ever since, but very, very slowly. I think right now we're at about just over 14,000 cases that have been determined here, and about 380 so deaths. So you see the situation in Japan is not like we're seeing the explosive outbreaks in other places, like especially China or Western Europe or even the United States. We can maybe get into this a little bit later about why it's been slow to expand here. It's a bit of a mystery to a lot of global health experts, but the government has done a very measured response so far, essentially. For example, in late February, one of the first measures they took were closing all the schools nationwide, and most of the schools are still closed down nationwide. That was one of the first steps that was taken. Since then, the government has been a little more serious in doing a so-called lockdown, but it's not the kind of enforceable lockdown that we're seeing in places like India or Western Europe, where they might even arrest you, or you have to carry a permission slip to leave the house or something like that. It's very more relaxed, and a lot of the recommendations from the government are just recommendations to shut down your business or to restrict your business hours and things. So a lot of people are still going out. A lot of businesses are still open, but there's tremendous social pressure in Japan to shut down anyway. So even though there's no formal requirement or law forcing you to shut down, most places are shutting down, and you see a complete slowdown in daily life here in Japan.
So I think
Can you?
yeah, the first case was even before what we had in India. India we had in 20 on 25th January we detected first case. You detected on January 16th. So by that way, I think Japan is doing quite well in that scenario. How do you see India such a big population? Do you think we have been able to contain it in the right manner? How do you look at India?
I mean, that is an amazing undertaking in India, having shut down the whole country like that. It's hard to believe that that such a feat was possible. You know, standing from afar and not having been to India and seen it with my own eyes, how the lockdown is happening there. It's hard to imagine containing a country of more than 1 billion people and telling them not to go outside. So I have to hand it to the government there for pulling this off. It seems that India has actually been one of the success cases in dealing with this. I don't know what the testing rate there is like in terms of trying to test the local population and get a grip about how many infections there actually are. That actually has been one of the big.
It's about 400. It's about 400, which is one of the lowest, but still we are pulling it well. We have contained it by way of, a lockdown. That has been our key instrument. Coming back to our core business, that is automotive industry, can you give us a
Right.
sense on how the production is rolling? What will be the current capacity utilization in terms of manpower, in terms of production, in terms of, supply chain? Because the all over world you see there is a problem, there is an impact, but can you act in isolation even if you are fully prepared or you're rolling on the production?
Well, you're right. It was a problem for Japan. The Japan market is still largely going. Sales here are down. I don't know what they're going to be uh, for this month or for April, but in March they were only down about 9% or 10% or so. So and same for February. So not a big impact so far, but you know, they were able to get by a little bit with continuing production here to feed local demand. The problem, though, for the Japanese manufacturers is that they are so export oriented. I mean, you have Nissan and Toyota and Subaru and Mazda are very, very heavily export oriented. So before they were even reacting to the local situation here, they were already trimming back local production in Japan because demand overseas was not rising to the occasion. They didn't want to flood the inventories, so they had to trim back here. What they're trying to do, though, is against all odds, they're trying to keep the factories going. They don't want to do a complete lockdown like they have in the United States or in Europe or other places, or China, where they had to shut down the factories for months, or, you know, weeks at a time. So here what we see is kind of a patchwork approach where you have select days here and there, or for a stretch of maybe 2 weeks, one line is down. And this is more, I would say, not so much out of safety concerns for the spread of the disease, but
Exports demand.
more of a, yeah, inventory control.
Okay, so there is on local market continue to be same. Is there any kind of panic, any kind of sentiment slowdown in terms of buying pattern? Do you see that in Japan?
Not really, but I think for definitely this month we're going to see a big hit in April because nobody's out, nobody's open. There's dealerships are closed down. It's you know, I don't know what the prediction will be for in terms of overall economic growth, but we're going to see a huge tumble this month.
So this month you see completely shut down entire dealership and production also, or production is
No,
happening
no,
bits
no
and pieces?
complete, no complete shutdowns, but like I say, a big drop from normal levels. And they're saying this will continue into May and into May with like Toyota and Nissan. They're expecting maybe half the normal production levels.
In April and May.
Yeah, in May. Yeah.
How do you see the situation in Korea, South Korea?
Korea seems to be handling it fairly well, and they're coasting a lot on internal demand. They are also doing kind of a patchwork approach as well. They are keeping their factories running as much as possible, but they are hurting because of the export demand. The export demand just isn't there. They are, however, being able to float a little bit higher just because of the local demand. I think in what was it, March, I believe the domestic sales were actually up
Oh,
in South Korea, which helped buoy both the Hyundai brand and the Kia brand. And they were able to do that, I think, largely through generous incentives, but still they were able to push up their sales volumes.
okay, okay. So, how do you assess the situation now in Korea? In a few weeks ago, the situation was quite grim. Has it improved? The cases are coming down. How is it the situation?
I think the situation is much better in Korea. They are kind of a global model of how to handle this. They were very serious about testing. I mean, I think they per capita they by far stand out ahead of the pack in terms of testing. They were able to triangulate pockets of these outbreaks and isolate them early on and trace them with ease. They are very serious about workplace uh, contamination, so they're locking that down. But again, it's a very pragmatic approach, like you see in Japan. They don't want to shut down the economy just to shut down the virus. They're trying they're kind of threading the needle to try to balance the economy with health concerns. It's a dramatically different approach as from what you see in the United
So there is
States.
a complete strategy of getting into lockdown and getting out of the lockdown that is backed by proper testing, equipment availability, and everything. All entire infrastructure is supported. That's what you're saying. They're ready with all arms and ammunition before they take a step. Going back to your hometown, Detroit, which is also global hub for automotive manufacturing, there the situation has been worsening day in and day out. How do you see that, and how does it reflect on the overall global automotive landscape? What's your assessment when once we come out of this COVID?
Well, I think that you're right. The situation in Detroit is pretty grim. As you know, they canceled the Detroit Auto Show this year. It was supposed to be held in June, but they canceled it partly because they wanted to use the convention hall as a field hospital. That's how bad they thought it was going to be, that they needed this entire field, this convention hall in downtown Detroit as a possible field hospital to handle all of the COVID-19 cases that were going to come through. I don't think it's materialized as badly as they thought, which is a positive, but that's the kind of mindset that they were entering with. My parents, my family is still back in the United States. I have a mother and a brother there, and each of them know somebody who's already died from COVID-19. So it's really affecting the local population there. Um, but that said, I think that there's also kind of an optimism now. The auto industry and the people in the auto industry there are past this kind of shock and worry stage. They're kind of getting into life. They're adjusting to life with COVID-19, and they're looking to how we can get out of this crisis. I think they're seeing that the crisis is beginning to plateau a little bit, and now they're thinking about, okay, how do we get out of this? And the talk now is about how to restart the industry.
Okay, okay. Looking at the scenario, global scenario, how do you see? Do you see the poles shifting when it comes to automotive trade? Right now, China is the leader. They are the largest market as well as largest exporter. If you take entire, component to the vehicles, even in electric vehicle, they are very strong. How do you see these poles shifting after this COVID scenario?
Even the polls of dominance.
Power,
Well, I
yeah.
don't. I think China will still. China just has so much size and momentum behind it. I don't see that changing for a long time. I think they'll remain the biggest market and producer for a long while. The United States is in a cyclical kind of decline already before the COVID hit. You might see you're going to see kind of a ramp up when we come out of COVID, but you'll see that as well with China. Um, the trade war between the United States and China is an issue that needs to be resolved, I think, long term. That idea of trade imbalance and access to market access between the two, that's going to be an ongoing debate. and it's still not resolved. And that is weighing, I think, on China's competitiveness and the output of the China market in terms of auto production. When that is resolved will partly be determined by the U.S. Presidential election this fall.
How do you see the US scenario right now? Because it's getting bad to worse. What went wrong? Was there some miscalculation or the kind of statements coming from the president itself? There has been some
Right.
cases of weird instances of people drinking sanitizer and all that. So how is it being received by the locals there and the industry? Which part of the automotive value chain you see the most hurt in US? Uh,
Well, I think the entire value chain is hurt in the U.S., but I think where you're going to see the most sensitivity is probably in the retail sector, because they are the ones maybe were all, in some certain senses, they were already on thin ice. So the bigger OEMs, I think they'll be safe in the long run. I don't think we're going to see anybody going bankrupt because of this. They have good cash on hand. It's not like the financial crisis of 2008, 2009 when they were financially weak and then hit with this. They went into this crisis feeling fairly strong. So they have good credit lines at this point, which should be able to weather them through. I would still say that the retailers are going to be the weak link. There, we'll probably see some hurt on their level. In between, some of the down tier 2, 3 suppliers may also be hurt as well.
How do you see this in Japan? Is the scenario same in Japan, or you see a different story there?
That's it. I think Japan is a little bit more isolated, only because of the way that the Japan has handled it, and being more pragmatic, not shutting down the entire economy like they did in the United States. I mean, the problem with the United States, or one problem with the United States, is very fragmented, the approach. Different states are doing different policies. Different states are very severe with their lockdown status. Other states are very loose with it. Some states are starting up already. Some states are keeping the lockdown going on for another month. It's very fragmented and confused. So that, of course, the auto industry itself is not all confined to one state in the United States. So you have to have this cross-state commerce and trade that, in order to support the supply chain as we come back up. So it's going to be the differences between the ways different states are handling the COVID crisis are going to impact how successful the industry recovers.
So coming back to the support system, what kind of support system you are looking around, or you are seeing coming up in your region of work, like be it Korea or Japan or US, the government and OEM? How OEM, because OEM is the center of the value chain. How are they supporting their partners, like be it dealer partner or the suppliers, tier one suppliers or tier 2, tier 3? I think in the entire scenario, the importance of a small tier 2, tier 3 suppliers is somehow diminished, because there's very less interest of OEM also there, because OEM would like largely to keep their dealership operating or afloat, because they have to ultimately sell the car through that. But for tier 2, tier 3 supplier, I don't think there's any kind of because not one, then you can probably get the another one. So how the value chain or the government support is trying to keep the entire ecosystem intact in Japan and in US also, if you could share?
Well, the government in Japan has been very proactive in terms of putting out a stimulus package. It's the biggest stimulus package in the country's history. I think it equates to a huge fraction of the GDP. As a matter of fact, it's like something like 15% or something more even of the GDP. So there's a huge amount of stimulus being thrown into the system right now, and that is trickling down. But you're right about the sensitivity of these lower tier suppliers in Japan, and they were already basically operating on the ropes, on a razor thin margins because they are the lower tier, less skilled, less value added suppliers. And they are competing on a global scale with these kind of commodity suppliers from places like China, India, Southeast Asia, that can compete better on price. So they were already had their backs to the wall. And when this comes around, it's going to be a trying time for them for sure. Japanese OEMs are very good about supporting their suppliers and keeping them whole. So I would, if I were a lower tier supplier, I would much rather be working with a Japanese supplier or a Japanese OEM at this point than I would be like a General Motors or a Chrysler or somebody like that. But that said, it's a dangerous time.
So you see, Japanese OEM are more supportive to the value chain compared to American. And what could be possible reason? Is it that Japanese OEMs are good in financials, or their balance sheet is strong enough to support, or what's the trigger of this?
I see. Well, I think a lot of it's historical that they have this keiretsu system in Japan. It's similar to what they have in places like uh, Korea, for that matter. But um, basically, you have at the top of an OEM, and then you have a business group which has all the suppliers almost in a vertical silo, and they all stick together, and they're held together by cross shareholding. So if like for example, Toyota Keiretsu is a very famous one. Toyota owns shares in all of its suppliers, and its suppliers own shares in Toyota. So they're held together in this mutually assured destruction, so that if one goes down, then the others
Other
go
is
down
there to
too.
pull it up.
Yeah, they have to help each other because their financial bottom line is all linked.
So, uh, looking back at India, how do you see the scenario here? Because in terms of support from government or the overall value chain, how do you assess the situation? You are well aware of the developments in India also. So,
Right. I
if you compare the India with others.
That's a good question. I would say you'd have to maybe tell me a little bit about how you see India pulling ahead. India seems to be doing a fairly well job in pulling this out.
So
I'm not sure to what extent is the government really being proactive in doing this, or is it the government? Is the stimulus hitting the automakers directly?
stimulus package that you are talking about. So
Right.
there's no direct, there's some moratorium kind of thing has been offered so far by the government and RBI, that you can say the apex bank in the country, Central Bank of India, that's called Reserve Bank of India. They have offered some kind of moratorium, but I don't know many will be opting for it or not, because ultimately they have to pay the interest. Only it is being deferred, so there is no actual stimulus that you could say that has come so far, but the people are hopeful that in the coming maybe in next 1 month there could be something that the government will look at it, because April has been one such month which is in the history of Indian automobile. Since we started manufacturing automobiles in India, we have never had an entire month which is completely shut down. So April 2020 is one such month when the entire automotive manufacturing activity or sales activity was completely freezed. Not a single product sold, not a single product manufactured. We are talking about some bits going to open, but there also to smoothen even little quantity of production, it will take time, because you do not have the actual supplies available, because the interaction or the interaction with the international market has completely cut off after this COVID. So to get all those some important parts which are imported from Japan, Germany, or China, they are still not available. So it will take at least 2 3 months even to start a little production smoothly. So it's gonna take time. It's completely shut down right now. Let's see on May 3rd is what the end of this earlier announced lockdown 2.0, Now let's see if there's a lockdown 3.0 and how much of relaxation is given by the government in this scenario, because the situation is aggravating. We did not see any major slide in number, and the testing is yet to catch up compared to the developed nation. India has very less testing right now compared to what we are doing in other countries. So I think we have to look at two counts. The testing has to be increased. Then we have to reassess the lockdown strategy. That is very important. And how do we come out of this lockdown? There has to be a sure shot or some kind of a strategic, exit policy. Suppose if we increase our testing from 4,000 to say 10,000 or something of that sort, then probably it makes sense. Though we have increased the testing over compared to the past month, but it is still a long way to go. Overall, the industry, the sector wants that bit of economic activity should start, especially automotive manufacturing should start. A couple of component manufacturers have said that they are going to start partial manufacturing. The country's largest manufacturer, Maruti Suzuki, has got permission to start partial manufacturing with a limited number of staff. So the current situation stands here. Let's see how it moves to the next level.
Yeah, I'm interested to see maybe how this affects the local market long term. You mentioned an important fact about the cutoff from the international supply chain and having to rely more on domestic sourcing and domestic resources. And I wonder if that won't kickstart more of a domestic self-reliance in India. In other words, you'll have to maybe look inside more. Some industry leaders are talking about that being one of the long-term developments that might come out of this because India will have to be more self-sufficient in a lot of this supply chain that it realized, hey, we are so strategy to spread the risks like that. Another question might be too, will this complete shutdown for a month with the Indian market? But I'm wondering, will this further just put them out? Will this be a crowning blow that they just can't recover from? Will this put them back a year or so? And will Suzuki continue to dominate?
See, one thing is clear here: Suzuki is going to stay and continue their dominance, because this scenario is going to impact equally everybody on be it the recent entrants, that's MG Motor, or a Korean company called Kia Motors. But so far, their response has been very good, and that was largely driven by the type of vehicles they introduced. They hit the right white spots that were available, or those segments which were growing very fast. So they had that edge over the other players. But Maruti's dominance, whatever happens, I think will not go away, because there are few reasons. See, uh, and the new entrants also will continue to have their share. So in terms of market share, I don't think that there is going to be any major shift. However, the overall market may shrink a bit, despite uh, a sense that the car demand for newer car will increase a bit. That's what the trend says, because of people wanting to be more secure, safe, because of the current situation. A kind of fear psychosis will continue to be there in terms of fear of getting infected. People may not like to hitch a ride or take a ride hailing service which had at least a couple of passengers coming in and out. They will rather prefer having their own car. So we see that used car space or low cost car can pick up, and we see two-wheeler sales also to go up in this scenario. So
Yeah,
let's
very
see, because people would prefer private vehicles over public transport. That's what, at least for the next 1 year, that's my assessment. But looking at the Indian economic situation, purchasing power is limited in India, so we cannot see complete boom in sales, because we have limited resource, limited earning. Otherwise, the economic slowdown that we were already in for last few quarters, that had already brought down the demand of vehicles. Then you had BS6, which raised the cost and price of the vehicle. That also brought down the sentiment in the market for automobiles. So putting all together, we were 3.4 million unit last year. I think it will take at least 2 years to go back to that level again in passenger vehicle. Overall, we used to
Wow.
sell about 24 million automobiles, which includes 21 million of two-wheeler and all. That will take also 2 years to achieve. So I think we are pushed behind at least by 2 years in
Wow. Yeah,
automotive
yeah,
industry.
that's a big setback. That's a huge setback. I don't
Yeah.
think we're going to see that kind of a setback in Japan. I think we're about 5 million now, or 5 million last year. Sales were already down last year because of a sales tax increase here. The market in general is in a downward trend because of the shrinking population here in Japan. We'll take a big hit, but I don't, I think it'll be like this and come back up a little bit, but always at a long-term decline here in Japan is what we can expect.
How do you see the dealers functioning in US and Japan? What kind of margins they have? Do they have appetite to to overcome such kind of setback that we have seen in India? Had it been in Japan and US, do you think the dealership community or the tier two, tier three component or entire component industry had the appetite to weather such kind of setback? And if
But,
so, how?
right. I think so. I think so. In the United States, I think you're going to see a lot of new innovation. This is forcing a lot of rethinking. I'll focus on the United States because I don't think the impact here in Japan is as drastic yet, and I also don't think that the Japanese are that quick to innovate and change the way they do things. But in the United States, what you're seeing is real um, uh, change in the way they're thinking. They are realizing that, hey, if we want to weather this storm, we need to do things like home service delivery or concierge service, or go online with sales and things like this, or somehow do use their downtime for, if they can't be selling cars, maybe repairing cars or servicing cars, or at least retraining their employees, for example, using this downtime to get better familiar with the product, so that when the customers do come back, they are in a better position to sell the cars and talk about their features and understand them and master the product that they're trying to sell. So these are all new things. In that sense, it's this, in terms of this retraining and reset of the industry and the approach. It's a little bit of a little bit of a benefit to them to have this downtime, because where you never, in the normal course of business, you'll never have this kind of downtime to do things like retrain or experiment with new business approaches and whatnot. And what this is doing, what this crisis is doing, is forcing you to think outside the box and giving you a little bit of the time and the leeway to do that. So I think this is going to have some lasting effects on the retail landscape, not just in the United States. I think that you're seeing this being taken up all over the world. I mean, China is a great example of where they're like, using TikTok to reach the customers and market their dealerships and things like that. So this whole new digitalization of the retail sphere is really going to take off, I think.
One popular trend that is being advocated or being buzz is that the people will shift towards owning a car rather than sharing a car or shared mobility. What is your assessment of these developed market where the purchasing power probably is much stronger than country like India? So if there is a shift, that will be massively visible in these markets. So or do you think that's happening in US, Japan, and Korea?
Well, they talk about that as one outcome, especially like it's like short-term outcome when we're coming out of the COVID. People are going to be worried about sharing a car. ride hailing, etc. But in reality, I don't think it's going to have a big impact on sales in these markets like the United States, South Korea, or Japan, because those kind of shared driving is shared riding and shared ride hailing and things of this new mobility is not really taking off. In the United States, you'll see Uber maybe, but not a lot of ride sharing. Um, in South Korea, it's not very developed at all. And in Japan, it hardly exists, period. So you're not going to see a big jump in private ownership because of this. I think you'll just see a rebound in normal sales.
So already the penetration of shared mobility is very weak there in these
Yeah,
markets.
it's
So
already very
they
weak.
have
So
nothing
everyone's
to
not going to get a
lose.
help out of this for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Coming back to the dealer community again, what kind of average profit margins they operate on in Japan and US developed
Oh, that's a
countries
good
like
question. I think in Japan, I'm not sure what the profit margins would be at the dealerships here. In the US, it really hinges on what franchise you're with. If you're with a hot brand that is doing well, we're talking Toyota, you can make, you're going to be doing very well. But if you're with a brand that's suffering, and I'm thinking about, let's say, take another Japanese brand, for example, let's talk about Nissan. Large swaths of the dealer population are operating, at a loss. They're not making much profit at all. So it really depends on what brand you're with at this point. And it's a real a crisis like this for a brand that's already on the edge. Let's take Nissan for example again. Could be a make or break deal for a lot of these dealers because they can't withstand the storm. Stronger franchises like Toyota, maybe some of the luxury dealerships where the margins are much fatter, they can maybe get by better. But it's scary for those at the margin. We're talking maybe some Chrysler dealerships or maybe some Nissan dealerships or maybe Mitsubishi. Mazda is not is on the line too probably.
So before we take questions from the audience, one or two last questions from my side. Look, how do you see this job scenario in Japan in automotive industry for the next few years, looking at the current situation, and same in US? Do you see any kind of job crisis coming up because US has already been dealing with the lack of employment or unemployment? Do you think it is going to add massive to it because the automotive industry is one of the largest employer in these countries also?
Right. In the I think what everybody is the OEMs, what they're trying to do right now, I think, is to conserve cash and get through this crisis as best they can so that they don't have to do any major layoffs. Um, it depends on how long the COVID shutdown continues. But if it's only a month or two and they can get by with furloughs, unpaid furloughs, maybe they can come back and won't have to do any serious cutting. Some of the question marks might be a company like, again, Nissan, which was already planning its own midterm restructuring plan. That's supposed to come out next month. And part of that plan was to include already some factory cutbacks or some shutdowns of maybe lines here or there, or maybe even factories here or there around the globe. So when you have the COVID pandemic on top of it, that puts the whole equation into a question mark, and maybe they need to even cut deeper. But I would be surprised if you see major job cuts in a place like Japan just because of this. I mean, they were able to get through the earthquake and the financial crisis without much damage. Nissan
Okay.
might be the outlier. They may have to adjust some employment here in Japan, but I don't see a big impact.
Okay,
Oh,
let me take some questions from the audience, right? Should we take the questions now, Hans?
sure.
Okay, okay. Let me take the first question from Mr. Ramurthy. With Euro 6 norm being available in India, uh, with in the post COVID scenario, how Indian companies can be strategically integrated with global demand by ventures with Japanese company or other overseas company? How do you see this?
Hmm. That's interesting. Well, if you can standardize the emissions to a more European centric standard, it's possible that you could use that, let's say, with joint ventures with overseas OEMs such as the Japanese makers, or even I was going to say US makers, but it seems like they have mostly given up on India. I was going to say you could use India as a low-cost manufacturing base as an export market. Nissan was doing that for a while, and it's possible that you could then ramp that up again because you could get double use out of those factories for the local market as well as overseas markets.
Another question comes from Mr. Ulhas Gajanan. Japan is the first in the world to announce stimulus to relocate production unit in China. India will accept these companies with folded arms, maybe as JV, M&A. What is your response to this support for the initiative? And also, I would like to add, do you think India gaining in this because the Indian Japan automobile industry interaction has been much deeper, much stronger? Do you see Japanese companies pulling out and probably finding home in India?
I think I think the ideal purpose of that response or that government backing is to actually bring them back to Japan, not to have those automakers or those suppliers relocate to other countries. I think it's to get them out of China and bring them back to Japan. But that said, China, I mean, if as long as they can go to a lower risk place, that is also acceptable, I would say. I think the big question for relocating in India would just simply be logistics. I mean, are they close to the customers that they need to be feeding? I think China is very close, especially when you get to a lot of on the coastal areas of China are very close to some of the southwest Japanese production bases in Kyushu. There's a lot of factories out in Kyushu, which is in southwestern Japan, which is very close to China and Korea. And there's a lot of parts going back and forth there because it's so convenient. It's a logistical. So I don't know if you have to go all the way to India then to get those parts. I'm not sure. It'll all boil down to just cost analysis.
Okay. Next question comes from Dheeraj Dhar. He wants to ask Japan. He's suggesting Japan is a classical case study. They have bounced back after so many turmoils, crises in the past. So she wants to understand what are the key learning or mantra of success that we can take from Japan. What do they do that they are so fast in terms of recovering from a major crisis?
I think what the Japanese have really mastered through all these years of experience with crises, and I'm talking mostly things like earthquakes or typhoons or even tsunamis most recently. But what they've learned from this is the importance of supply chain management. They have become masters in terms of mapping out all the weak links in the possible supply chain, going not just to tier one, but tier two, tier three, and then mapping contingency plans about what happens if there's a break here, what happens if there's a break there, where can we go else? And they've planned it all out. They're the masters of long-term planning. And it's probably from an American mindset, it's too boring, it's too much minutia, it's too detailed. But it really works when you need it, and that's where they're masters. They can't be beat at that.
So the next question comes from Bala Subramaniam. He wants to understand how do you see the entire mobility as a service changing after COVID? What are the key changes that you see after we eject of this crisis?
That's a good question. How would mobility as a service be? Perhaps maybe if you want to avoid crowded places, delivery services will be in bigger demand going ahead because people won't want to go shopping in person. And because delivery services will be in higher demand, we'll have to find new low cost ways of doing it. And probably the biggest cost factor for any kind of transportation is the driver, the human that's in there driving the machine. So if you can get rid of that driver, it reduces the cost of operation dramatically. So you might see more, this is probably long term, but you'll see maybe more automated driving and things like that. It might speed up the development of that. But that said, I think
So I'll take.
that's so long term. I don't think it's going to have a major impact on because by the time we have automated driving cars with robots behind the wheel delivering my packages, we will have developed a vaccine or a treatment for COVID-19, and we won't look at COVID-19 any worse probably than we do the influenza today. So I think we'll probably fix COVID-19 before we fix new mobility.
So let me take next question, and it's a bit long one. I'll read it for you. This is Mr. Arun Bandi who asked, my question to the entire auto industry is, in spite of all the technological advancement, why still the accidents are happening on roads during overtaking? This is a bit different from our topic of discussion, but this is a pertinent question. We all must address this. In entire world, there is no foolproof, cost-effective, user-friendly safety gadget for preventing accident of overtaking, which happens in fraction of seconds. I have the one accident system safe overtake. So he wants to understand actually why are we not able to contain the accident. Till COVID came in, accident was probably one of the biggest reason for human fatalities. So
Mm.
how is it being addressed in these advanced countries? And India stands tallest in this. I think India has the highest number of accidental deaths. So any suggestion?
Well, I, when you say overtaking, you mean passing on the road, right? When you're passing and another car comes in heads on, right? That kind of accident. I think. I think you can't put all the blame on technology, right? Because there's until we have robot cars that drive themselves flawlessly, it's always going to be human error that's driving these collisions. And no matter what kind of safety technology you have in the car, if a human is going to try to undertake a risky overpass or try to pass in a risky scenario and crash the car, it doesn't matter if you've got 1,000 lidars around the side or the best seatbelts and airbags in the world, you're going to have a crash. And a lot of it just boils down to, I think, driving habits.
Okay. If you have any question, you can ask me. Otherwise, now we'll end the session. And
I'm just, I'm curious to see when you think the industry will rebound in India. What's the? I guess it starts with the end of lockdown. Okay. What's the latest scenario for that?
So we don't have any clarity on how will it be extended after May 3 or not. I see it should be extended, and but with partial relaxation. That's what we hope. Coming back to the actual production, I think we'll start the partial production, but that too, to smoothly produce even partial quantity, it will take 2-3 months. And if you talk about when we'll completely achieve the normal production, I think it's gonna take at least 1 year for us to because you have to get the demand also, because the economy is badly hurt. People may lose job, or there is going to be pay cuts, massive pay cuts that are going to follow. And the people of India are very they are very supportive. They are contributing to the government funds. They are pushing hard to support the government in time of distress. This is a bit reverse of what in developed country happens. Uh, The advantage we have that the global crude price has massively come down, though the consumption has also come down in India right now. But in the last few years, the crude price was to record low, and but the Indian government was trying to cushion the economic slowdown with this. They were trying to kill the deficit by putting taxes on fuel. So we had one of the longest tax regime in the last 5 6 years. From there, the government has been able to, correct the fiscal deficit. So the impact has been cushioned, but still there is an impact. Only automotive industry is losing about 2300 crores of rupees every day. That's the entire automotive industry size is about 180 18 billion, 118 billion dollars, and about it contributes about 10% to the country's entire GST gross GST collection, goods and service tax collection. So of course, with the entire industry going to halt, it is going to impact the exchequer also. So it will take some time for us to recover. Some suggest that the GDP growth might go into negative or negative to 1%. That's the assessment, 1 or 2%. So that for a developing economy, 1 or 2% GDP growth is very, very not normal. We, if we have to put it this way, it's not normal, and it is really cause of concern. So I see that entire economy, barring few, sectors. I think especially retail is the most hurt. Travel, tourism industry is also hurt. So overall, it's not a great year. So the demand will also reflect on that. India is a huge population with one of the low purchasing power, so
Well, you bring up a good question or a good point about the production lagging the market or the market rebound, because as we come back from lockdown, and it might expect consumers to come back and buy cars, or even
mm,
privately owned cars. They might come back. They might be able to buy cars, or might be willing to buy cars, but they might not have the money to buy cars. So because they have been on
yes.
been impacted so hard by a month or two out of work. So what we see happening in China might be a good indicator of how the recovery might happen in places like India or Japan, or more so the United States, where the lockdowns end, consumption starts to pick up, but people aren't buying those big ticket items because they simply don't have the money, and they defer those big ticket purchases. And because that demand is still not coming back robustly, then the production also has to scale back to adjust in accordance.
So
So production will continue to lag.
it's even before COVID, our production level were not, we were not completely utilized. On an average, if you look at entire industry, it was hardly 60% of the capacity utilization that we were in, 60 65% before COVID, because the economy in the last year started sliding, so the demand was very less, there were a lot of problem already that we were dealing with when it comes to economy. But now COVID coming up, it has completely washed out even the slight hope that we had. So even to achieve that 60 70% of the 60% of the capacity utilization, I think it will take at least 1 year. That was the situation that we had in pre-COVID era.
Yeah.
So that's a big problem. Let's see how does it do you see the investment in India coming, or do you think it is being slowed down? Because a lot of foreign companies were coming up, especially Chinese. How do you see China emerging out of it? Because you see a lot of discontent, or not so happy with the China's image that has come out after this COVID. Many hold them responsible for this crisis. Also, we have seen. How do you see entire thing, shaping up China's image?
Well, you're right. China's image took a big hit because of this. I don't see any major OEMs bailing on China or trying to get out of China. It's just too big. They've invested already too much. I think there's still a lot of business to be had in China. So I don't think you're going to see like big OEMs pulling out or not pulling out, but even trimming back or scaling back in China. Um, I think that it's just business is put up with a lot of China's quirks and a lot of the weirdness that goes on in China. That they wouldn't normally do in any other country simply because it's China and it's the size of China. And I think they'll just keep on going with that. You know, COVID-19 or whatnot. We went through SARS, we went through COVID-19. This probably won't be the last one. Next time it happens, they'll be more prepared, and they'll have all these new procedures in place to deal with this kind of thing. So it's just a learning experience, part of the evolution of doing business in China.
We have seen the crude price, tanking to record levels. Now it went into negative also. We have seen so many things in our generation. I think we never imagined the crude price will go into negative,
Yeah.
and scenarios like this. One, we were emerging fast in electric vehicles, and fuel cells was also being talked, and a lot of work was going on. With this current scenario, how do you see the demand for different fuels like EV vehicles or the fuel cell vehicles or the ICE engine? How do you see this scenario changing with this?
I don't know. Some people say, this will spur on the development of like new mobility or electric mobility even more, like kind of like the theory that we were talking about earlier, the demand for new services, mobility as a service. I think probably I'm more conservative in my own belief. I think probably this is an era of conserving cash to get through this crunch and this crisis. So I suspect that most companies will be conserving cash and doing it. If they do anything, they'll be kind of trimming back a little bit on their investment into these, advanced technologies that are a long way off from generating any kind of revenue flow. And especially with oil prices the way they are, at least in the short term, nobody, with gas prices down, the demand for electric vehicles in particular isn't going to be sky high anytime soon, especially in a market like the United States, which is extremely sensitive to gasoline prices.
So you look at that, especially my view is that because since crude price has tanked, in India you have a lot of tax on it, so it is not really passed on to the customer. But in Japan, in US, in other parts, there it is being passed on to the people because the cost of fuel has come down. So the demand, of course, the operating cost of ICE vehicle will come down equally. Like the electric vehicle, the biggest advantage that they were offering was that we have a low operating cost, overall, operating cost. But now with this, ICE engines become even competitive, very competitive with the fuel price coming up. In even in short term, I see that the kind of tilt towards EV that we saw, maybe a bit correction there also, and we see that ICE engine will get another lease of life. I think it may delay.
I think so.
Yeah, so it may delay the complete penetration of electric vehicles. How do you see the fuel cell in Japan? Because a lot of push for fuel cell was there in Germany, Japan, other European part. How is it shaping now?
Well, I mean, there's
Sorry.
only two, as far as I can tell, there's only two major fuel cell projects going on. That's the Toyota project. Maybe three. Toyota project, the Honda project with General Motors, and then of course Hyundai has its own project as well. Those are maybe the major ones that we're looking at globally. Mercedes had its own project that it was working on, and just this month it decided it was going to end its fuel cell program. So that's not exactly a sign of big support for the technology. I think that it's very expensive. It has a lot of logistical problems, and maybe long term, it's maybe an end solution for the year 2020, 2100 or something like that. But right now, I think we're locked into an electric mode, and that's where you're going to see the big developments and the big investments over the coming decades.
How do you read into GM postponing plan or canceling the plan to get into shared mobility space? Do you think the others, Daimlers and others, to also follow the suit? Do you sense something of that sort?
It could
What
open
what
up.
has really triggered this kind of decision? Because GM was very bullish on this. They had huge plans, and now suddenly it's not happening.
Yeah, I think in the United States, there's a mental block to it. People just don't like to share their cars. It's a very, it's a society that's kind of geared towards personal private ownership. I don't like to share I don't like other people using my mobile phone. I don't like other people using my car. I don't like other people living in my house. It's that kind of thing. I don't think the model really caught on in the United States, but especially at a time when all companies are feeling this cash crunch. I think there was just like, well, it's not working out. We in normal times we could string it out and see what it would happen with it, but we don't have that kind of time and that kind of money to play with now. Let's just cut it before it
Oh,
cut
I
it early.
really don't understand the aspirations of these American OEMs. Look at Ford or GM both. They are trying to exit many markets. They are shutting their production plants also in many countries. What's Are they going to focus only on profitability? Top line doesn't matter to them, or is it just because the senior executives get certain advantage because of keeping the books in green? What is really motivating them to take these kind of actions in the last 3 4 years that we have seen?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's a really important one, I think, about corporate strategy because let's General Motors is a perfect example. They used to be the world's biggest automaker, and now they're just pulling out of everywhere. India, Indonesia, what have you. Um, they are really shrinking, and it'll be a test of two philosophies. One philosophy is bigger is better, and the other philosophy is no, profitability is what counts. And you can see examples of success in both camps. I mean, Toyota is kind of a bigger is better approach. They are profitable and always expanding. They have a footprint in basically every market worldwide. They are truly a global automaker. Then you have, let's say, a Nissan Renault, which tried to be that and overextended and couldn't pull it off. And basically, that's part of the reason they're in the mess they are now. They overextended and just bigger wasn't better for them, that's for sure. Then you look at a smaller company like Subaru, which is very, very, very small, and you wonder how they can even survive by themselves or basically by themselves. Now they're under the Toyota umbrella, but still, they are very profitable, the envy of the industry. Traditionally, I should say. They've had their ups and downs recently, but traditionally, very, very profitable. And General Motors thinks it can maybe pattern itself after the Subaru model, I guess, by being compact, focused, and playing to its strengths and not trying to be all things to all people.
Coming back to one last question to your city, Tokyo, how is it being observed after Gon's exit and everything? The pain for Nissan doesn't seems to be ending. Do you see any light at the end of the tunnel, dark tunnel that they are in? How do you look at Nissan right now?
Well, Nissan has a lot going for it. It has great manufacturing, great R&D. The talent in the company is good. It has good placement in a lot of the key markets, meaning Japan and China and the United States. It has at least it has this luxury brand Infinity, so it has some brand equity there. The But the problem, it has to really wrestle with making the most of this alliance that it's in with Renault and now with Mitsubishi on one side and Renault on the other. And we'll see. They like I say, next month, all three of these partners are going to come together with some kind of midterm plan. Each of them will have their own midterm plan, but they'll be coordinated so that they can kind of leverage each other and dovetail with each other better. and we'll see what they come up with, and that will be a telling turning point, whether they can actually kind of pull all three of them out of this gutter that they're in.
So look at the market in a market like India, where Nissan has a very minimal market share, and now Datsun has gone. They have about 1.5% of market share that they are struggling for a decade. It's been more than a decade, I think, they are here in India. They pulled out from Indonesia, where I think they were doing better than India. Uh, what's the talk in the headquarters? Do you feel there's some sense or some talk happening on India's operation also? Do you see some kind of threat on India operations for Nissan?
Yeah, I would say that India is a place that they're going to be looking at very closely in terms of either killing off Datsun altogether in India, or probably, or I don't know, doing something with the factory that they have there with Renault. I'm not sure. I seem to think that Renault gets better use out of that factory than Nissan. So
Mhm.
maybe there's a way to Nissan will give it to, sign off its share or sell its share to Renault or something like that. I'm not sure, but you're right. That is going to be in this plan that comes out next month. That will be a key focal point.
Thank you, Hans Grammel, for talking to ETAuto. It was indeed a pleasure and very nice discussion. We got a lot of topic to discuss.
Yeah,
Hope
we did.
to keep associating and discussing again on different topic. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for coming to ETAuto and watching and putting such beautiful questions. Keep watching ETAuto. Our next town hall is going to be there with another mega leader of automotive industry. Keep tracking latest news and developments and updates on ETAuto. Also subscribe our YouTube channel, and do not only subscribe, also click the bell icon so that you get notified whenever we have some important discussion lined up. Thank you so much once again for joining ETAuto.